Welcome to day 4 at OOP. Just a reminder that also for the upcoming keynote, we will use Slido for asking questions. So if you are going to slido.com and use the hashtag OOP Digital, you can ask your questions and vote for questions other people have asked. Now, I'm really super happy to announce this morning's keynote speakers. Gabrielle's and my path actually crossed at the time when she was head of Agile in Yahoo's innovation group. That was around 2006. However, we only met briefly, and I never really got in. We really never got in touch, unless last year when we presented a keynote jointly with Alistair Coburn at the Virtual Agile 2021 conference. During the preparation and the keynote, I got to know her even better and thought she would just be a perfect match for OOP. So I'm really super happy to have her now. And she had that brilliant idea to bring Riccardo Mariti along, who is known for running the world's first Scrum restaurant, which is in London. So whenever you're in London, you should go by. This combination sounds really like innovation in the wild. So I'm super excited to welcome Gabrielle and Riccardo on screen. It's all yours.
Great. Good morning, everybody. So excited to be here. And back at you. I love that. You know people from afar, but it's really interesting when you actually get to work on something together. And that's really with Riccardo and I too. We knew about each other. He'd even stayed at my house with Jess Sutherland once in America when we were away. And so I knew all about my books and everything, but I'd never actually met him in person. And then we connected at the start of the pandemic and actually became friends virtually before we ever met in real life. So that's why I thought he'd be a great one to talk about how we innovate really pragmatically. And so, Riccardo, you want to say hi? You're in London at the moment?
Yes, I'm in London. Good morning. Can you hear me?
All right. So I'm going to take you through a few little stories this morning. So the thing we're noticing, I've really been pivoting my own way of working and business because, we live in interesting times. We have all this incredible disruption. And while all this disruption happens, there's also a lot of opportunity. And I love that. I love exploiting the constraints, saying, what is it we can't do? How do we find a way? So we must innovate. This is something that every organization I'm working with, every person has to personally innovate. And so when I talk about innovation, I'm going to talk about it fairly simplistically. There's this sort of idea of core innovation. This is really incremental improvement. So this is when we improve what we already do, our existing products and services, so make them better. And I call that the kind of, barely keeping up, keep the lights on approach to innovation. The next type is when we look outside, we bring in new ideas. They could be from other industries, they could be from competitors, but we're bringing them into our organization. And this is sort of to keep going, to get better. So extending what we already do. Then the next type is this truly transformational kind of edge innovation where we shoot for the stars. We do something completely unknown to the world. We bring in new ideas. So on the spectrum, we're going from barely keeping the lights on to really what do we do in very different novel ways. And I think that pressure to have to innovate at the moment is actually leading to incredible things happening. But what are the challenges to it? So what I'm seeing across the industry is there's been this focus on let's build it right, let's build it fast. So this is when people often do look at bringing in Agile for the first time and saying, how do we do things better? This can often get stuck, though, in that kind of core innovation loop where we're really just building better, faster horses or building the wrong thing faster. So that's not really helpful if all you're doing is focusing on delivery. Now, the next reaction is often to bring in, and when we do that, if you look at a remote control, it's my favorite, example of just doing more stuff and how bad that is. I ask people, if I give you a remote control, who wants more buttons on their remote control? And of course, everybody's like, well, no, actually, what we want is less. Now, the next picture, I really love it. It's a guy went to visit his grandmother. And while he was visiting her, they were watching television. And she kept getting up to change the channel and then put it on mute when there was a break. He was like, why are you doing that? You've got a remote control, it's working. And she said, I can't use it, it's too complicated. So the guy was obviously a mad user experience genius because he fixed the problem. So what he was doing was removing the inessential, all the things that don't matter, so the essential can speak. So not only is going fast, building the wrong thing bad in terms of you not reaching your outcomes, but it's also making it harder to use our products and services. And because I work at the strategy level so much, actually, this looks like most organizations, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. They're in separate silos. No one's really talking to each other. And we keep forgetting it's about the customer outcomes and simplifying those. So the reaction then is to say, hey, we need to build the right thing. So they start bringing in design thinking and thinking about the customer experience, which is really great. However, if you don't get into the system and start fixing the environment so innovation can grow, and this is my favorite thing to do at the moment. I always like going after the biggest problems. And for me, a lot of Agile's largely a solved problem. There's a lot of great people out there who can do Agile, but it's everything else we need around it to support it. So this gets into the incentive structure, anything that starts rewarding individuals, anything that means that we can't take lots of small bets, so big upfront business cases, really slow ways of funding our products, that creates problems, because then if you don't do that, all these great ideas end up in the idea graveyard. So most companies I know have great ideas, they just can't get them out or can't get them out fast enough. So what we're looking at is that balance of balancing these two worlds. And so coming into this, Yoda had said, hey, we've got a space and you can use what you've done before. And that's really easy. I can sort of pull out my last slide deck and off you go and you're ready, recycling. But I thought actually that makes me lazy. And with Riccardo, we're constantly talking to each other and kind of challenging. Every time I speak to Riccardo, he does something so amazing that it just inspires me. And I thought, you know what? How do we kind of learn? Because the whole point of doing this is to learn ourselves as well as sharing the outcomes. And I think to make innovation really work, you've got to be in this constant sort of disrupting and pushing yourself further. So that's exactly what I did. I spoke to Riccardo and said, hey, why don't we add something different? So I started working on some new slides yesterday, jumped on the plane to Portugal, where I am now from London, and I actually tested them on the plane. So there was a guy in the next row. I saw he had this cool book, Chasing the Rabbit, which is old book, but one of my faves. And so we started chatting and I said, let me show you what I'm doing. And so we started having a great talk because he has this really lean furniture business. So that was my first sort of hacking of the idea. So this idea got built in because I think what's actually preventing a lot of this is this idea of fear. Why do we not innovate? Why do we not disrupt the organization or ourselves more? And it's this fear of disturbing the status quo, right? People get punished by failure. I was talking to an exec team the other day, and one of the people said, we've got to take more risks. We want these execs to take risks. And I said, okay, but what prevents them? What happens if they take risks? Well, it's fine unless they fail and then they kind of get punished or lose their job. I'm like, okay, do you think we have a problem here? Maybe. So we've got to be able to set up a way that we can disrupt and feel safe about it. So, what happens if we don't disrupt ourselves? This is sort of being blissfully unaware. So we hide risk and we hide failure and we say, let's not take any risks. Let's not disrupt ourselves. Let's try to force the system to prevent them. And of course, what happens is they come and get us when we least expect it. So that's really dangerous. Instead, what we want to do is, I call it running towards the dark. Go towards the dark. Don't go towards the light. Chase after those risks. And there's some really interesting stories of people doing that. One of the first places I really took this on was when I looked at Toyota, and they go into this world of constant crisis because they run very lean. They're forcing people to have to adapt. So they don't always have the things they need. So by forcing people to have to innovate constantly, the idea is many small crises will lead them to be able to deal when a really big crisis comes along. And I was in Japan at the time talking to Katayama-san, who is the chief engineer of the Lexus, really interesting guy. And we were watching when economic slowdown happened and Toyota just kind of turned off the faucet a bit, right? They went down to a steady stream, whereas in America, there were just piles of cars turning up and they were still building them. They couldn't change the machine, but because they constantly run lean, they adapt. It wasn't such a big deal for them. Here's a story I love. Tiger Woods, he disrupts himself. So he has these amazing golf shots, and every now and again, what he does is he completely deconstructs it. So imagine you're here, you're kind of at a really amazing level, you know, the top of the game. And what he does is he takes a shot and tries something completely different. So what happens is he goes below the curve. So he gets much, much worse, but he keeps working and working and working and working at that shot just to get back up. And because he can now combine his learning, he gets that just edge a little bit better, and he continues to do that. He'll deconstruct. So he blows everything apart to see what happens, which is fairly courageous, right? We usually don't want to do that. We're always trying to prevent it. A great example a lot of you might have heard about is Netflix. Now, if we think about Netflix, you think about your viewers, and the natural tendency is to say, we want to have this wonderful viewing experience. We can't have any interruptions. So it would be scary to do anything that would interrupt that service at all. But they go towards the dark. They have the simian army, which is the idea that they will actually try to find their weaknesses and exploit them by doing it live. They try to take down their system constantly while it's live, just so people have to keep adapting, right? So this is so they can build this resilient ecosystem. So for me, innovation is often about trying to disrupt yourselves. And if you want to think differently, you really have to live differently, which means if you want to innovate, you've got to personally challenge yourself, set an example so other people can see it. So this is really a great lead in to Riccardo, because he just, every time I speak to him, he's doing super crazy things. So I'm going to go over to Riccardo and he can talk about how he does this in his restaurant environment. Oh, you're on mute or something. Can't hear you.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you so much. Gabrielle, I always love your story. I love working with you. It's great fun. You know, we try to live in an agile environment and do fun things. And, you know, this is the first time I've seen this deck in its format, literally now live. So, but I think that everything that Gabrielle and I talk about, it's more this whole Tiger Woods mentality. It's that mentality of really preparing yourself and preparing your team, having a lot of fun with it, creating a game. I think that we get bored of our own products much quicker than our customers do. But in order to stay fresh, in order to stay alive, we really need to create an environment that's playful, fun, safe. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was a recent quote I heard where the chap was saying blame is not for making mistakes. Blame is for not helping or not asking for help. You know, so it's kind of like completely overturning conventional workplaces where people actually do come to work and have fun. How do we create? We were chatting with Mary and Tom Poppendeck yesterday, and we were asking. They asked me a question, and I said, "Yeah, I'm always trying to create the perfect environment for really good people to come." And Tom challenged me and said, "No, hold on a minute. I think everybody's really good. You've just got to create the right environment." So, you know, that I think we change the questions we ask ourselves now to, you know, how do we create an environment where people thrive, where our team members thrive, not just financially, but that too, but also psychologically, emotionally, in every way. And that's what we're always trying to do. The title of this particular presentation was Pivoting in a Pandemic. I met Gabrielle just before the pandemic struck, but we hadn't really met each other in person. We'd met on several Zoom calls, and we spoke almost daily through the pandemic. And she saw, you know, us go, because I'm in the restaurant business. We've had a restaurant which has been running for nearly 30 years now, and back in 2016. I really had to change something with the business. It had got very stale, and there were a number of environmental things going on that were causing us to be not very profitable anymore. And I had to find a way. I discovered Scrum, which I find a very simple framework to to work with, and introduced it to the restaurant. And since 2017, we've been running the restaurant without managers. And we were having plenty of conversations about this as the pandemic hit. And, we really needed to adapt. We needed to learn to adapt. And I think part of the conversations that Gabrielle and I are always having is this thing of setting up the mindset in advance, not adapting when you need to adapt, adapting when you don't need to adapt, allowing yourself to be an evolutionary company, or like a body, like an organism, like a family that just evolves as but actually trying to force the evolution. Gabrielle was, I was really loved the Mobius loop, and it kind of, this is two slides that I had a little insight when I was working with my team. Is when we first started in startup mode, we were in constant innovation. And then we found what customers liked. We decided to translate that into standard operating procedures. And it became a repetitive. We moved really from the innovation circle straight into repetitive work. And as soon as we got the standard operating procedures in place, we put a police force to make sure that nothing ever got changed. And so we had about 10, 12 years of doing that, where things were going really well. But then the marketplace changed. And we had created a structure that didn't allow us to evolve. And I found that absolutely fascinating when I started to study about Agile and be around Agile people, and seeing that they were iterating really rapidly. I believe companies like Tesla, I ended up going to Tesla for a while, and I'm working with somebody who spent a year there, and they're iterating motor cars. On record, I think Musk has said the Model S, they were iterating it 27 times a week, and that was the whole car. And to go from the restaurant business, which is traditionally incredibly hierarchical, standardized operating procedures, recipes, lots of management, keeping things in place, we just didn't allow for any innovation. So we created an environment where we constantly try to innovate, we try to push. The questions and the answers and feedback I got from my kitchen when we started taking a more agile approach to the way we were working was that they didn't have time. They had too much business as usual going on. They had to do the preparation, they had to clean the restaurant. So I asked the team if they could just give me 20 minutes each person per day at the beginning of the evening, and 20 minutes at the end of before the evening shift. And when you actually added up that in people hours at the end of every week, we ended up with about 28 hours of innovative work, and that completely transformed the whole business. So moving forwards, it's this thing where we're always trying to get continuous improvement going on, but every now and then we want to throw something disruptive into the equation, just to, in a bit like the military, like the special forces, they're constantly training even in times of peace, because they never know when they're going to need to go to war. And I've always loved that analogy with business in the same way. We've got to always prepare for when something's going to break. And we built that into our into the mindset of the teams. This is my restaurant. You can't really see it. You will in a second. When we introduced Scrum and Agile practices to the restaurant, my manager and head chef were not too keen at all, and handed in their notice. And we very quickly found ourselves without a manager and a head chef. So I asked the team if they wanted me to replace them, or if they wanted to have a go at running the restaurant themselves. They said they did. The first thing we got them to do was run their own roster. And since 2017, the teams have completely organized their own holidays, their own vacation time, their own roster, when they work, when they don't work, under guidelines of, allowing us to be a profitable restaurant. But nobody tells them when they need to work. They have cross-trained each other to enable themselves to have more freedom. And now we have people, front of house team members who learn to cook. They all learn to do the bar. They all learn reception. They all learn about taking reservations, stock taking, how to do orders. And there really is very little barrier between the front and house and the kitchen, the waiters and the cooking staff. They are educated in accounts and very, very good all-rounders. Please interrupt me if you think I'm missing something, Gabrielle. I'm quite happy. Yes, on the left-hand side, we've got this thing, the keeping the lights on. Of course, we need to keep the lights on, and we need to keep our eye on that all the time. We encourage a lot of innovation, a lot of things, as long as it's not below the waterline, as long as it's not something that's going to sink the business. We want to encourage team members to really express themselves, to the extent that even a new team member, I have a couple of 17-year-old students that joined us recently. They come in part-time, preparing for the spring and summer, which is very busy time for us. And, within the first day that they're working, they are authorized to go as far as even comping somebody's meal in order to keep happy customers. And so we've always really empowered team members to make decisions, because we're trying to reduce the decision latency from when a customer needs a decision made. You'll never hear, oh, I need to go and ask the manager. Whoever is there in the front line has to make a decision as to the best way of dealing with it. The best way may be ask the customer what they'd like us to do. But they are authorized from day one to comp a meal, to give away free drinks and so on. The only proviso is they have to report to us when they do it. So they have to write it down. And as soon as there's been a problem, they have to report it as the first opportunity. So then that becomes a coaching moment for us. So we can train our team members.
What I was going to say about that, if you just go back, was the idea. What does happen though is you can get complacent, because Riccardo's restaurant is seen as so successful, it's doing well. So they put in they get into the incremental innovation, right? They're making lots of small tweaks. But what happens with disruption, either you try to force it to do more, to go beyond it, or it gets forced on you. So this is when disruption is first getting forced on you, which we're about to see.
Yeah. So, newspapers, we know pandemic hit, very bad news for restaurant business. It was this kind of weird thing. We were running a restaurant, and then all the supermarkets started emptying out. Everybody was panicking. And then literally overnight, we were told, I think we were told at 6 p.m. Tomorrow morning, so midnight tonight, you're closed. And we were like, wow, we can't even operate as a restaurant anymore. And I was absolutely determined we were not going to close. And so I phoned my lawyer and said, look, legally, if I'm no longer a restaurant, if I'm a supermarket or a deli, what do you think? And he said, absolutely fine. You can run it as a deli. You're not a licensed restaurant anymore. You just don't take customers. So within 6 hours, we had ordered everything we needed to turn ourselves into a deli. We ordered packaged food from our organic meat suppliers. Later on, we learned how to package the foods ourselves. But literally, during the service, I was talking to Gabrielle on Zoom and saying, oh my God, this is crazy. And while we were talking, the team members were tearing down the tables. We had our last few customers coming in for their last meal. We thought it was going to be a 2-week shutdown. Little did we know it was months and months, and almost a whole year of being shut down as a restaurant over the duration of the last 2 years. And we were building up a deli, writing flyers. We did the next day. We went around all the supermarkets and saw who was doing pre-made food and what they were doing, because it's not something we'd ever had any experience with. So we did some quick research on that and came up with our own product. Our bakery went bust, and so we learned how to cook sourdough bread, and we're still producing it today, and our customers love it. We did our own packaging, packaged our favorite foods. We had always done home delivery, so that was quite good. This is a panoramic view of the restaurant terrace. with this was the first day open as a restaurant. By the time Christmas came, actually, we had hampers. The whole place was completely full, and there were no tables and chairs anywhere. We put them down in the basement, and I think what allowed us to be able to move fast and not have a meltdown and actually enjoy the process was that we were always watching things like the Formula One racing, where they do the pit stops, where they change 4 wheels and refuel the car in under 2 seconds. I think the world record now is 1.8 seconds. It's the Red Bull team. And we're just watching those type of videos again and again and saying, how can we be more like that? How can we be more like this kind of this swarm of bees that just swarm around everything and get things done, where if you looked at us, you would never know who was a leader and who wasn't a leader. In fact, when we started appointing leaders in giving people names like Scrum Master or Product Owner and those type of things, they just became de facto managers and started giving people orders, which was the antithesis of what we wanted to create. And so we still don't have any job titles in our company. And people ask, so what's my career progression when I come here? And the only thing is, you're either a team member or you become a business owner. You either learn how business works, and I suppose your progression is you either go on to another company and do really, really well, because you've learned how to run an agile team, or you go and open your own business. And we've had a few team members looking at business plans and trying to figure out ways to open their own businesses, and that's something we like to support them on. But I think it's kind of allowing team members decision authority from day one, and really encouraging that whole ethos within the teams to work together to solve problems, and not to ask a question without at least trying to figure out the answer for yourself. So it's kind of, don't come to me with 5 questions of things that you want answers to. Come to me with what you've figured out and ask me, what do I think? That's a better way. So every time somebody's got a question, it becomes a coaching moment. And we often learn, I think my team come up with much better ideas than I would very often. And it's very, very refreshing. This was our operations room. We put a lot of signage out. We wrote
just go back one, Riccardo. What was interesting, you can see there's some DHL boxes, and this is a good example because Riccardo doesn't even see how many cool things they do. Like, we were on a call during the pandemic and I saw these and I'm like, why have you got all the DHL boxes? He said, oh, well, I was taking the dog for a walk, and on the way back I saw all of these outside a stationery shop. So I pulled over and asked what they were doing. And because of the pandemic, if you think about it, you can't get supplies, but people were closing down. So he said, can I have them and use them for the delivery boxes? Now, everything you see, it's like craft shop, because they constantly kind of run lean, use what they have, be innovative, they can quickly repurpose. And so while you might not get a signage store, you can make your own. So I think that is really important, that kind of spirit of innovating constantly.
Yeah. And we needed them actually, because a lot of companies just weren't there anymore. They had they closed their doors probably for about 8 to 10 weeks. We just couldn't get any deliveries of majority of things. So it was a limit to what we had to do, and we couldn't get a lot of the raw materials. So we had to iterate our menus and what we were doing for home delivery. And people loved getting a DHL box with their food delivery, and one of the tribes turning up for. We Gabrielle really liked this because we used to red tag things even when service was good. Here we have our 2 pizza ovens, and I go in sometimes and say, right, these are out of order, and just, you're not allowed to use them for the next 2 hours, and see what they did. And I'd do that on a very busy Sunday afternoon, and they'd say, oh God, we got to fire up those ovens. How do we turn them on? And there'd be this sort of panic, and they'd call somebody and they'd figure it out. And it'd be a lot of laughter, and we'd have a beer afterwards and say, how was that? Or I might take one of their key team members and just say, right, come and have lunch with me. right in the middle of a busy service, and just tell the team members they had to figure it out for themselves. And I think, you know, it's that playfulness that the team were used to change. They were used to a lot of forced disruption, just because that's how we play the game, and it becomes part of the cultural norm in the business. We wrote to our neighbors. We asked them if there's any look. We had all these maintenance people that needed jobs, and so we just said, oh, look, if you need anything, we'll help you with do your shopping, if emergency repairs, whatever it might be, just let us know. If you need a lift to the hospital or whatever it might be, we're here to help. We want to be part of the community, you know. And Pash, who's been with me for over 20 years, she was walking around with signs and waving to people in the street, where people, there was always, it was like a ghost town in London, but it was, you know, sometimes a car would drive past and she'd recognize them and she'd wave them down and say, we're open, we're open. So it was just kind of telling people, you know, we were here to help them. And we got a lot of support actually in the
session. Companies that do really well, Riccardo, they just are like you. They care about the customer. You're constantly thinking, not how can I make a lot of money out of this, but how can I help the people who need help? These people can't go out. They're often isolated. I mean, there was a beautiful little video Riccardo sent me where they go to one of their customers' houses, and she was, I think, over 80 or something. It was her birthday.
Yeah, it was her 90th birthday, yeah.
And there was singing happy birthday in the street with a cake outside. I mean, that was just so lovely.
Yeah, her family had phoned and said, oh, we can't get down to her because we're locked in. Could you bring her? She's there with her nurse. And could you bring her some cake and a delivery and leave it outside the room and, you know, outside her door? And then we videoed it for her, and we were singing happy birthday, and she was waving, and she had a birthday cake there. So yeah, and it was fun. It was great fun. And we looked after the hospitals, and this is one of our neighbors and a great customer, and he'd come down and help us deliver food to the hospitals and make pizzas. And we got a lot of feedback from our customers, constantly asking customers for feedback. Yeah, we're just trying to keep the lights on, trying to keep our suppliers busy. And we managed, well, we're still alive 2 years later, and really looking forward to the next chapter. I think it's very exciting.
Just on that, is that you were in that kind of, you know, keep going, right? Doing something kind of in a different way. So while delis and supermarkets existed, they were bringing it in, doing this new idea for their business just to kind of, keep the business going. But this next part, you kind of, everybody looks at it and thinks, well, he's done. It's almost like, you know, he's good to go. So this is interesting because how do you do that fully transformational? So do you want to talk about where this came from, Riccardo?
Yeah, we were, this was just a fun game. It was homework at the end of, we were teaching a class with Gabrielle on Mobius, and we all had to go away and figure out what we were going to do. And the class decided that they would help to come up with something. And we said, if we couldn't run the restaurant as a restaurant, you know, what could we do? If we wanted to keep the lights on, we wanted to keep the business going, you know, eventually in some format. So they said, well, you know about Agile. Gabrielle does. There's a whole community of people who love coming to the restaurant to see how you're getting on and what you're doing. You know, why not turn the restaurant into an Agile training center where, you know, people could come down and actually learn about agility and train. And so, yeah, that was something that we thought about. And then I put out a few messages, as we just all committed to doing something by the next day, that night on LinkedIn. And I got somebody in the States who said he was really interested in that format. And he had businesses, and he was in the hospitality industry, and he had empty premises. And we've been in discussion on particular, you know, potentially doing that as a business. And I've applied for a business visa, which should come through next month, and I'm going to be going to Florida and setting something up there. So we're always coming up with new challenges. In fact, we might have a challenge, which.
So this morning, go to the next slide if you can, Riccardo. Yeah. So there you see the LinkedIn group to Mobius. And while I was having my morning tea, trying to kind of wake up, Riccardo calls me, so we're chatting. And then I said, this whole idea of challenging, and I said, actually, let's get everybody to do a challenge. So we're going to do a 5-day challenge on the LinkedIn group. We're going to do some webinars with it, and give away prizes as well, things like the Mobius cards you can see there. So what we're looking for is people saying, you know what, because we don't want to just give talks, right? What can we do to inspire ourselves and other people to do more? Come up with something, anything. It could be a personal challenge, something you want to disrupt and rethink and redo. It could be Tiger Woods style. It could be at work. What can we start sort of blowing up and see what happens? And just one story from Riccardo. I call him, it was about 2 months ago, I think. There was a lot of rain in London. And he said, oh, I'm dealing with all this flooding in the bottom. And I said, oh, are people helping? And he said, well, actually, that's interesting. I just started doing it to see who would turn up. Some of the staff are having coffee while others are actually helping. He said, that's interesting. And I said, oh, how are you going to, what are you going to do for this flooding in the future? And he said, yeah, well, I'm actually thinking, should we try and flood the restaurant every month to get used to it? I went, okay, that blows my mind. So we're going to throw that kind of challenge back to the group. Join us on LinkedIn. And what we're looking for is people saying, hey, I'm going to try this. And what happens? We don't mind if it's like catastrophic, whatever. It's all quite fun. So join us on the LinkedIn group. And I think we can stop sharing, and we might have time for some questions.
Yeah, I think Jutta said she was. Hello, Jutta.
Jutta.
Yes. Hi. Oops. Yeah, I just wondered if I'm on mute. You know how this is. So just have to be sure. So I'm not. So the very first question, although it says Riccardo, I actually believe it's for Gabrielle, which is allowing people to be able to do everything in software seems asymptotically, whatever, impossible. Or am I wrong there? So
allowing everybody to do everything in software seems impossible. Am I wrong?
It compares to how in Riccardo reporting from the restaurant where like everyone can do everything and should. And how does this relate to software? And that's why it's more a question to you than to Riccardo.
I really, when I worked with especially video gaming, because you have people who are just amazing artists, and that's what they do. And you can't just turn up and start sketching a few pictures, right, when you're doing like Sony PlayStation graphics. So the idea, though, is what you're trying to do is create a holistic system where because about the whole kind of from customer end to end. And what I think that idea of, you've probably also seen the T-shaped people, which is like the trunk of the tree is really solid. It could be a graphics, but you have some arms you could help out. So while you might not be someone who could do the graphics, maybe you can help test them and look at them, etc. So we have people love mastery, but we do want people to take on different roles and learn them. For example, really good example, I've been working a lot with getting defects down. Sounds boring, but one of the first things I do is I want to shorten the queue. I sometimes get rid of the defect tracker system because that allows queuing and more complexity. So I blow that up first. Then what I do is I move 2 developers to the front line and we rotate them. So when a call comes in, I'm trying to get that solved as quickly as possible. So if it's something the customer support person can't immediately solve, they get the developer there. Now, 2 things happen. They either can solve the problem pretty quickly because they understand it, or they know who should get it. They can much quicker solve that queuing system and then figure out how do we stop building software that doesn't that has those defects in it in the first place. So what Riccardo was talking about, that everyone does these jobs, I take my teams out, they play these roles. We do shadowing. They sometimes have to play being a carer in the community, so they really understand what it means. I've sent people out to go out with police people, all sorts of things. So I'm big on guerrilla research. I want people closer to the action. So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
It's more deeper understanding.
There's also, if you look at, I've just put a link. I don't know if that can be shared with the attendees, but this mob programming that I've had a lot of experience watching the teams do that, where you have a driver and you have people who are just stakeholders even joining teams and learning to program. They're being guided through, and everybody gets a chance to do it. What we found is that it's crazy slow. It slows the team down so badly for about 6 to 8 weeks, and then suddenly they exponentially increase in speed. And it's not just in a restaurant business, it's in every business, because we all become more intelligent as we learn other people's jobs. And it's really the essence of having a T-shaped person, or a multi-skilled team, and trying to get rid of, maybe even lower your backlog so that you're only producing things that your team can actually produce, so you have no outside dependencies. It's thinking outside the box. We're trying to get teams to win all the time, and so the best way to get them to win is to give them simple tasks and let them build it up from there. I know it's difficult with well-established companies, but I'm seeing more and more of that happening, and that happens a lot in Tesla now, where
I just love that focus on peer learning that you are both pointing out here. I would like to move on to the next question, because we have quite some questions here. And this is to you, Riccardo. What did you do to give people a feeling of safety in the midst of all that rapid and disruptive change? Was anyone anxious?
They were so excited. And I just said, look, I gave them all the book, this Jeff Sutherland's book, and Team of Teams, and we used to talk about it all day long. And it's like, hey, none of us like being told what to do, right? So I'm going to give you the opportunity. The restaurant business is so abusive. They're hierarchical. We were talking about it yesterday. For some reason in the restaurant business, you give somebody the label of manager and they become a mini dictator, very decent people. And it's like the label of management seems to change people dramatically, and they didn't want to be managed anymore, and it wasn't about me leading them. It was about, my role was really coaching them into, well, let's have a bit of fun. If we're iterating weekly, the worst thing that can happen is we mess it up for a week, and then we'll fix it. And if we're watching it daily, the worst thing that can happen is we'll mess up one shift, and it didn't happen. Teams were very, very happy and really jumped in. It was amazing. It was such a great atmosphere, actually. It completely changed the whole atmosphere in the restaurant, and it's never gone back.
Thank you. Another question to you, Riccardo. How did it work that 20 minutes individual innovative time created joint innovation? Did the people organize themselves? Did it work automatically?
Yeah. Well, we started just looking at bottlenecks. I'd been studying Ellie Goldratt's theory of constraints, and I was like, and I had a long chat with Joe Justice once, who did a fabulous course on hardware, which I went to Sweden and do. And he said, put some tape down on one part of the kitchen and a tape on another part of the kitchen, count what goes in and what goes out, and you're going to find quickly whether there's a bottleneck in supply or in how you deal with it, which end it is, remove the bottleneck, and then see where the next bottleneck comes. So it was anywhere, wherever it was normally the pain points, like, team, what's the biggest thing that that you get upset about, or that slows you down, and really just letting them all brainstorm, and then just asking them to vote on which one we should deal with. And we wouldn't move on to the next one until we'd finished the last one. So we had a kind of work in progress of one on our innovative work, but it was more teaching them the process changed their whole minds and the way they think.
I want to take a last question, because we are out of time here, which is, can people be also overwhelmed with innovating all the time?
I think you should answer that, Gabrielle, but my view is it doesn't matter, because if they've got to learn to deal with it, because we live in such a fast moving world now that is out of our control. And unless we learn how to deal with it, we'll be dead, as a company.
I was going to say, if innovation becomes the constant, then people who don't like change will find that constant, and actually, it'd be unsettling not to innovate. And I just say to people, we innovate all the time. you lose your keys, you have to innovate, right? All of us innovate constantly. So take away that fear and just say you always do. And so we'll make innovation the constant, and remember, just get people used to it.
And make it fun, and make it small enough innovations that even if we make a mistake, it's reversible. You know, it's not going to break the business.
That's the thing, is getting the system changed. So that's what Riccardo and I, by the way, with these other questions, we want to answer them. Bring them to the LinkedIn group. Jutta, I can grab them from you or put them in. Maybe we'll do a little follow-up session, and Jutta, you'd be well invited to join us because you've got a lot to say too. And we'll go through those. But you know, this is what we do. We come in, we help people to get the system so that innovation can flourish. So let us know if you need help, and join the LinkedIn group, and we can go through those questions. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Story.
Thank you
Riccardo.
both so much. This was really great. What an excellent example of innovation as well. I really love that interplay with both of you. And yes, we will forward the questions, and it's a great idea that you have that LinkedIn group, so everyone is welcome to join there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jutta. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Riccardo.